Right now, one of the most common forms of governance in virtual worlds is a reactive and punitive form of moderation. Multiplayer digital gaming, which have a long history of managing large and sometimes toxic communities, offers a wealth of ideas that are key to understanding what it means to cultivate responsible and thriving spaces through proactive means. With that thought as a backdrop, welcome back everybody from break, and let's welcome our next panel to help us understand how we can regulate the metaverse. How can we govern the virtual? To help us explore these questions, we have with us today, first off, Ann Hobson. Ann is a policy manager at Reality Labs at Meta. Prior to that, she was a program manager at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, where she oversaw graduate fellows pursuing degrees in applied economics with a focus on public policy. She was an Internet Law and Policy Foundry Fellow with the Internet Education Foundation. Previously, Ann worked as a Technology Policy Fellow at the R Street Institute and as a Public Policy Associate at Facebook. Ann has a PhD in Economics from George Mason University and a BA in International Studies from Johns Hopkins University. She's also kind of close to me, so kind of a neighbor, Ann. Next up, we have Genevieve. Genevieve Mark is the head of browser and web platform at Magic Leap. She's responsible for the Helio browser and Prismatic library, which allows creators to unflatten the web and easily make 3D web experiences. Welcome, Genevieve. And to moderate our impressive panel today is an advisor at XRSI, Debbie Reynolds, whom you all might know better as the Data Diva. She is an internationally published author, highly sought speaker, and a top media presence about global data privacy, data protection, and emerging technology issues. Debbie hosts the #1 global award-winning The Data Diva Talk Privacy podcast. She has been named one of the global top 8 privacy experts by Identity Review, and she has been named as one of the global top 30 cyber risk communicators by the European Risk Policy Institute in both 2020 as well as 2021. Let me turn the floor over to you, Debbie, and looking forward to this conversation. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me?
Sure can.
Excellent, excellent. Well, so it's a pleasure to be here today. It's a pleasure to be the moderator and get to chat with Ann and Genevieve and pull from their expertise in this area. I'd like to jump in here. I guess before we get started, I'll make a bit of a statement. So I think there are just so many things that are emerging right now when we think about the metaverse. Some of it may be people have a misunderstanding of what the metaverse is. Companies and businesses are trying to figure out how they can truly leverage it. We have individuals that are thinking about how can they do so in safe and maybe interesting fun ways. So I think there are just a lot of questions that are swirling around the metaverse in and of itself. So I think as we start to talk about it, we want to talk about it from all those angles, and also in terms of an organization like XRSI and all of us, we're all looking at not only the ways that people use it, but then also how can we create standards to prevent harm. As we know, a lot of the harms that we're trying to avoid, regulation may not be sufficient because regulation may be too late. So I want to start with Ann. I want to ask you a question. So can you explain for us what is the metaverse and what characteristics make it unique? And also, how can we take account how we build towards the metaverse with safety in mind?
And first of all, for this entire event, like safety and its broad conception is incredibly important. So I'm very glad that all these folks are in this room today discussing this important topic. I will do my best to define the metaverse. I think there are many definitions floating out there, and there's a lot of room for the concept to evolve. But first of all, the metaverse in broad conception is the next generation of the internet. It can include a variety of use cases that I think are novel and demonstrate the value of what we're building towards. For example, immersive learning or education. I used to lead outdoor trips in a past life. And the power of those trips to show people things that they didn't know that they were able to do because they're trying new things, or they're able to do stuff like you could do in VR, which is like throw a ball and it never stops going because gravity is off. The realm of possibility has expanded in that regard, and what's available to be experienced has expanded as well. It also helps in a variety of other situations, like dangerous situations, being able to train people that would be in those environments. So whether that be a firefighter, being able to see through smoke and experience what it's like to enter a building with all of that smoke, or whether that be a surgeon experimenting on being able to practice surgery that they're going to do that would have real world physical manifestation and implications if they were to get it wrong. I think that for the second part of this, when we're thinking about how we build with safety in mind, it needs to be deliberate and needs to be such that there are processes in place. And one of my jobs within Reality Labs is to work directly with product teams to ensure that our expectations for privacy are considered, expectations from external stakeholders are considered, and to look at our key priority areas and make sure that we're thinking through those as we're designing the products and features that we're launching. So that can be priorities such as safety and integrity, privacy, equity and inclusion, and economic opportunity. Those are always top of mind. And then we have our responsible innovation principles, things like putting people first and considering everyone, that permeate our discussions that we have with the product teams as we're building products. And the products that I work on are things like Horizon Worlds, Horizon Workrooms, and then our Oculus ecosystem, some of the offerings on MetaQuest. So things like Oculus Move, or some of our other platform experiences, like the ability to be co-present in your platform level home, similar to the way that we are now. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Debbie. Debbie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. It's great. I would like to talk a bit to Genevieve. So I think when people who aren't in technology realms, let's just say consumers, are hearing about the metaverse, they are thinking about the metaverse, but there is a difference between how the metaverse will unfold at an enterprise level versus a consumer level. So I want to talk to Genevieve and ask you, what is different for an enterprise metaverse versus a consumer metaverse?
All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Just want to start out as well. Thank you very much for having us here. You know, we're Magic Leap's like very, very invested in privacy and safety in the metaverse. So I'm really looking at this from like a product management point of view. I don't have all the policy experience, but you know, we're really interested in like, you know, how can we handle this from a Magic Leap product point of view. So like right now, you know, Magic Leap's done like a fairly big shift, right? Moving away more from consumer and much more towards enterprise. However, the problems are really similar, but the situations you find yourself in regarding the metaverse is pretty different. So one way to think about it is really the difference between like the metaverse, which is like the central place that you go to, you know, to collaborate with other people, to like a metaverse, right? Each enterprise or institution might have one or more metaverses for different situations. So some of these things can be like, you know, site specific, like a single factory or a job site that a metaverse is built around. They can be like company wide, like everyone in the company is part of this metaverse. They can be geared towards like specific like partnerships and collaboration. So for example, think of like a large scale project to design and build a new airplane, right? there's going to be a lot of different collaborators. There's going to be a lot of suppliers. There's going to be contractors. There's going to be not just your institution, but a bunch of other institutions involved as well. And even within these like closed metaverses, there's still, you know, there even though there's opportunities for collaboration and working together, but you know, there's any time you have like multiple people, there's always opportunities for negative situations, right? So such as like abuse and harassment, you know, data loss from any like single party or institution that's involved. So, you know, contractors don't want to lose their sensitive data. If you're, you know, building, so you're the main institution, you don't want to lose any sensitive data. There's the privacy of individuals within the specific metaverse, like employees, contractors, and suppliers. And then there's like privacy of individuals adjacent to a site. So say if you're working on a public construction site and, you know, you're wearing a bunch of headsets that's tracking information, you know, what about the privacy of those individuals as well? So I think there's lots of very similar problems, but there's very different situations. Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome. Well, Anne, I just want to throw out something here about harm. I guess I want you and Genevieve's perspective on this. So maybe I guess I'm trying to find buckets in which to conceptualize this. But when I'm thinking about harm, I'm thinking about it maybe in 3 or 4 different areas. So one may be kind of the virtual or spatial space where we can see harm. One would be the privacy of the individual. Another would be cybersecurity, and then maybe one would be more psychological. So I'll have you start, Anne. Give me your thoughts about, you know, any one or any of those things, or maybe you have something that I hadn't even thought about. I'll start with you first.
Yeah, I think first, one way to think about this is more on the line of a spectrum rather than like categories necessarily. Because I think one thing that was missing from your list was potential for something virtual to expand to the physical world, whether that be, you know, planning to meet up in the physical space and then that being a harm scenario. But I think like that boundary is going to be an interesting one that evolves over time. I also think that the areas of harm that you did mention are ones that are top of mind for us. We have a framework through which we think of different types of harms that can occur. And I think one thing that is important to think about is how these harms will evolve as new form factors like the one I'm in right now, virtual reality, come to bear and like become more popularized. Because I think that one of the factors that makes this experience unique, and as we build to the metaverse, this will be more common, is immersion and presence and this sense of like, I am embodied and therefore things feel more real and memories form in a much more spatial way. And what I mean by that is when I hang out with my brother in VR chat, for example, I felt like I was with him. Like we were just talking in a living room, for example. And I think that you can't really reproduce that with like current state social media or online experiences where the thing that might get closest is things like 3D experiences like World of Warcraft or Roblox or Fortnite, where you have an avatar that's representing you, but you're not embodied inside of it. And so one of the things we've been thinking through a lot is how does that change how one perceives harm and the commonality of the different types of harms that could occur. So for example, if you're thinking of online spaces that are more, you post a piece of content, that content exists over time, somebody experiences that content later, and it's really a 2-dimensional piece of content. That's very different than what I'm doing right now with my hands, which is conduct. And so what's going to be a lot more common as we move towards immersive experiences and experiences in general, rather than say thinking of a game or thinking of just a single digital web page, then we're going to need to consider a wider range of the ways that harms could manifest. Also thinking through conduct specifically, especially real-time conduct, because things like harassment and bullying are things that are much more common when we're interacting in shared space with one another. and are much more based in conduct. Hope that was helpful in terms of sort of framing how we are sizing up the problem and risks.
That was great. Well, Genevieve, I want your point of view on this, and also I love the fact that Anne brought up immersion. I want your thoughts on how immersion plays into this harm aspect, maybe in a unique way that we hadn't seen in other types of digital spaces.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think a lot of the like situations, that I outlined previously, where like harm might come into play, for example, like abuse and harassment and data loss and privacy, those already have a lot of parallels in real life. So if you're getting abused, if you're in a work situation and someone is being a jerk, and specifically in a way that veers into abuse or harassment, I mean, there exists workplace policies. And there exists like workplace regulations, like legal regulations and legal requirements for a workplace in order to handle those situations. Now, then the problem comes up is that, in this like new immersive environment, how do we, like, how is that moderated and how is that tracked? So I think one of the things that needs to happen is, a really robust set of tools for moderating whatever particular metaverse solution that you're using, because there's no really like if it's happening, I remember, back in the day, if it's happening virtually, like over the phone, even over the phone, right? If someone calls you up and gives you a hard time, didn't used to be a way of really tracking that. Now there kind of is. And the same thing needs to happen, for like a workplace or enterprise type metaverse.
Very good, very good. Well, Anne, so how should platforms facilitate safety in real-time social experiences? Who plays a role in doing that?
Yeah, so I think just like Meta isn't going to be the only company that is building towards the metaverse. We aren't going to be the only one contributing to the safety within it. And to me, this is a really a layered approach. It requires an approach with a bunch of different facets. So one aspect at the core is the platform policy. So I mentioned the emphasis in thinking through what conduct is going to look like in virtual spaces and tailoring our policies to address the harms that we would see in that type of space. We've updated the code of conduct for virtual experiences, which is our platform-wide policy, to take into account exactly that's the features that I mentioned. Things like immersion, things like the agency that you expect in a space that you've designed or that you've owned, or that is more closed environment versus a public environment. And I think that once you move past the policy, then we're looking at things like platform level features that help teens and guardians have conversations about their experiences to facilitate safety. So those are things like parental supervision or parental engagement tools. And then if you go into the experience itself, not only do you have app-specific policies, so in the context of Horizon Worlds, there is a prohibited content policy for what can be in worlds. And within there, you also have a bunch of safety tools that are important, because when you're talking about real-time conduct, people need to be able to take actions in the moment. And so we really emphasize that within experiences like Horizon Worlds and Workrooms. In Horizon Worlds, you have your personal boundary. It's 4 foot and it's on by default for non-friends. You also have things like voice modes, which garbles audio for non-friends in like a playful sounding way. There is a variety of things that I think are going to be common across a lot of experiences as we build towards the metaverse. So that's things like mute or block or report. There are variations on block, things like fade for competitive games, so that the person's not entirely disappearing from a game in which it's important to see who you are playing with. And then beyond that, there's, as Genevieve was mentioning, moderation tools, like the ability to have creators in certain spaces like your home within Horizon Worlds be able to take actions that you would expect in that space. So kicking someone out of your home, saying, hey, you can't enter, setting rules for that space, things like house rules, like, hey, everyone here should take off their shoes or reminder to be respectful in this environment. And those are some of the factors. But the one that gets forgotten a lot is norms. So just us interacting in the space itself feeds this set of informal rules that we would then abide by, especially when you can have like community formation or you see the same people in the same space over time. And that's pretty important. So right now I live in the DC area. If anyone's ever visited, if you go to the escalators in the DC Metro, everyone stands on the right. And if you stand on the left, then people will yell at you. And that is a form of norm enforcement or norm making sure that people are actually following the norms of the space, the informal rules of the space. And so in VR, that might take the form of, hey man, you're not being nice, like calm down, or hey man, that's not cool. You send them a warning, things like that, ways to ensure that we can move towards a set of not only formal but informal expectations that are encouraging the best out of people in virtual spaces.
Very good. I want to talk to Genevieve about enterprises and companies that really want to. They're excited about the potential of what the metaverse can be, but maybe they're shy about, either their, brand safety or how they're going to be perceived, or they may not be sure about the types of safety that exists in these types of virtual spaces. So what type of things do you think would help answer an organization is looking into going into the metaverse? Genevieve, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I lost you at the beginning of that question.
Oh, okay. So I wanted your thoughts about, let's say I'm a corporation. I'm excited about what the metaverse can be, but I'm also nervous about the safety, whether it be my brand safety, what guardrails there are or will be there that will help me feel more comfortable about trying to get into the metaverse.
Sure. So I think that this is this problem is really similar to the consumer problem, like both in enterprise and consumer. And I think it's one of the things that XRSI is working on together with industry stakeholders. And namely, that's kind of like a shared responsibility model. So this means that, the responsibility for like safety and accountability and privacy is shared amongst the different stakeholders that are building a solution or the consumer metaverse, right? And if you want to think about it like kind of, I've got an engineering background, but if you kind of want to think about it from an engineering point of view, you're really looking at every single party that's involved in building this metaverse, right? So that includes like hardware providers, that can be like headset manufacturers like Magic Leap and Meta. That can be mobile phones, that can be like laptops and desktops, like anything you're entering the metaverse on, right? And then on top of that hardware, there's like an operating system or platform provider, right? That's all the sensors that come with this hardware and the interfaces you can use to access those sensors. So, phone, there's like magnetometers, and you can count your steps and so on and so forth. On a headset, you've got like way more things. You've got like, cameras and microphones, depth sensors, so in some cases, phones have like LiDARs. Desktops also have a series of phones and microphones, all of those things. And all those things are available via an API. And then when you think on top of that as well, then like as a user, okay, how do you enter this metaverse, right? And that gets into like application developers. So, you build an application that lets you enter into a metaverse, whether that's like entering through like the web or entering through, a first party application like Horizons on Meta. your data is up there in some cloud somewhere, right? And those cloud services can be like first party as well. They can be, for example, like Horizon's cloud service. They can be third party, and in some cases with like enterprise metaverses, you might connect to multiple third parties to, handle your data or produce a digital twin or, connect to a map of your world, all those kind of things. And you may cobble together, you may like tie together a bunch of different cloud services in order to create your metaverse solution, especially in enterprise. And then so those are kind of like the sort of technically parts of it. And then once you get outside of that, you kind of end up with users, and you really end up with like kind of two types of users, right? The enterprises or institutions that are like providing a metaverse. So this is much more of an enterprise scenario. So for example, your company is creating a metaverse to do, solve some problem or collaborate with other companies, to work on a project on a job site. So that's the enterprise that's like, yes, I want to, use all these solutions together and create a metaverse so that I can solve a specific enterprise problem, right? Or it could be an institution, for example, like a school. You want to create a metaverse, a closed metaverse in an institutional, like educational setting to help facilitate learning. That's another type of like institution size party that might want is a stakeholder in this metaverse. And then lastly, like end users, right? Like we're right now, all part of this particular metaverse that we're in, and we are also responsible for the privacy and information safety of this metaverse, right? So there's a whole bunch of people that need to come together, a whole bunch of like parties that need to come together to provide like safety. And each one of these layers, each one of these types of users needs to state kind of what data and information they're using, what they're using it for, and like whether they're storing this data and how they're storing this data. Like what of this data in the metaverse and information in the metaverse that they're storing and using. So hardware providers, like there's like actual physical hardware, OS and platform providers. They provide APIs to all these sensors, right? They say like, hey, these are all the sensors providing. Application developers, like they don't necessarily use every single sensor that's available on like a hardware or operating system platform. Cloud services provider, again, just because an application sends something to the cloud doesn't mean that that cloud is either like reading it. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're storing it, but they might be, right? So all of those people need to be involved. And then an institution. So just because like, all this data is available in the cloud and in an application, and an institution can choose to like record this data. Maybe they need to record it specifically for, to prevent harassment, or maybe they're not. Maybe they're just, for some reason, and they should probably state why, they're storing some of this information of a bunch of people using headsets, right? And then lastly, even end users. So even us, all of us here are responsible, for like not being jerks, but also like we could take video, we could take images. We are in a sense responsible for some sense of privacy and safety in the metaverse. So, one of the ways to manage this is it's really similar to like, how different apps on your phone state what data they use and like how they store it, right? There's like so when you enter a metaverse or, each party in this, metaverse solution, they need to go ahead and like, say, like, okay, this is what we're using, and this is how we're storing it. Users and institutions, institutions are a type of user, should also have an opportunity to like accept via permissions, what data is being used and like acknowledge that they have read or agree to this information. Like maybe they go out and join this metaverse, or especially for example, like maybe in a more like consumery space where a company wants to enter a metaverse and like, I don't know, set up a shop or something, right? But they need to know, like, in order to protect their brand, like, okay, is this metaverse I'm like entering, is it like collecting data and sending it to a country that is maybe doing nefarious things with it, or is there like some regulations around the type of data that this metaverse is using that's like not acceptable in my country? Or an institution doing the same thing, right? If they want to say promote their school or university or something like that, they want to know what's happening with all this data that they're using in the metaverse. And the best way to do it is have a layered approach. So kind of a good example of this is like, for example, like Magic Leap has like eye tracking, which sounds kind of creepy on the outset, right? But the eye tracking, pardon me, the eye tracking is actually used to render our graphics. Right. So we take eye tracking data and we make sure that the output is aligned and stable, so that when you're viewing graphics on a device, it doesn't make you sick.
Thank you. I want to talk. Chat with Anne a bit. So Anne, I want your thoughts on safety in the metaverse. Like, first of all, unlocking the value of the metaverse and mitigating risks, but the risks I'm thinking about are more like data privacy and cybersecurity risks. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, if I can add quickly to the last question too, because I think there's a bottom line. First of all, Genevieve like really explained very well what the layered approach should look like and how that's almost mapped to the technical layers in terms of responsibility, shared responsibility for safety. But one of the pieces that I think I want to make sure is a bottom line is that if people don't feel safe, if brands don't feel safe in these experiences, then ultimately they won't want to be in them. And I think that equates to a failure on the level of everyone who's involved in building towards the metaverse. And so one of the things that I think is key is having a comprehensive look at what safety looks like. And you just mentioned cybersecurity and privacy, which are two other core components, because if your expectations for privacy are continuously trodden upon, you're also not going to want to be in that space. And that can happen in a variety of ways. Like, for example, earlier in the development of the MetaQuest experiences and Horizon Worlds, when you formed a platform level party or group audio with someone, that would transcend to Horizon Worlds, but the expectation setting was not necessarily there. And the reverse was also true. So when you left app experience, you were still, other people that you left could still hear you. And while that can be expected in certain contexts, so for example, a lot of you are probably familiar with using Discord to have conversations while you're doing something digitally that's not on the Discord platform necessarily. But user expectations need to be really set up. And really the points at which to do that are those inflection points when you are joining or leaving an experience or joining or leaving a party. And I think increasingly as we build towards an interoperable metaverse, you're going to have more and more bridged experiences. The expectation to notify somebody that, there's a different privacy policy that applies when you're moving over to this experience from this experience, or there's a different set of content policies and expectations and conduct related policies that mean that, in this space, you have to, for example, wear a business suit, or, hey, this is a wedding we're having in this world. You have to, have the correct attire or the right behavior that is appropriate to that setting. So not disrupting it, for example. That becomes so much more important as we build to the metaverse. But then one piece that's layered on top of that is something that we have to continuously think about is how notice evolves to set those expectations. Because when you're in a virtual space like this, getting a pop-up is no fun, and it's easy to look away from that or to not want to experience it. And I think that we get a lot more creative about the ways in which we inform people that something is changing, whether that be audio, whether that be visual. I'm really excited to see how content design evolves as we're building towards more 3D and immersive and experiential apps.
I just want to follow up a bit on that answer. Very good, thank you. So you said something that triggered something that I want to talk a bit about, and I'm going to ask Anne first, and I'm going to talk with Genevieve about this. And this is about consent, right? So I think in the metaverse, consent will have to be incremental in some way, right? So it's not just, click yes to an 80-page policy, and then you go into this environment, and it's, whatever happens, right? So I think part of what you're talking about is, like you said, it may not be any fun to get maybe a pop-up, but depending on what someone is doing in the metaverse, there may need to be multiple places where maybe consent or notice is in the system. But I want your thoughts on that, and then I want to find out what Genevieve thinks about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. So some of the ways and the places in which we put this contextual education is first in the new user onboarding experience. So that's I think the first time then we're like, hey, this is how you use the tools. Hey, this is these are some of the things that can happen, and this is how you enter, for example, your safe zone. But in afterwards, it's necessary to remind people that that is the case. So another feature within Horizon Worlds is something called report evidence capture, which is a rolling buffer. So every few minutes on your device, there is stored your audio and your interaction, your basically video data. And that is only sent to us if you submit a report. And the purpose of that data is so that you don't, in real time, for safety purposes, have to live a bad experience or relive a bad experience in order to record it and submit it to us. But on the privacy side, what this means is there is recording ongoing. And so that is not necessarily something that you would expect in all spaces. If you're entering, say, a 7-Eleven and there's a camera there, I think that we've evolved as a society to expect that that might be the case. That's not necessarily true of, say, a public park or somebody else's home, or like a school or a church or something like that. And I think that thinking through that means that because we are not necessarily aligned with user expectations for privacy, there's a greater burden and expectation that we be able to educate users, remind them not only at the point of them having the experience the first time, later. And so that might look like you enter your safety tab, there's information there, or there's a place that you can access outside of the headset as well, like you have a parent education hub or a safety center page that finds some of these features. But I think that, consistent with what I just said before, there's a lot of room for creativity in how you continue to educate people. And one of the things that I think is unique about these spaces is you can educate, you can have immersive education that is and press this button and go through the exercise of entering the space where you have quick access to report mutant block. And that builds muscle memory in a way that you can't do in 2D experiences, but can help facilitate greater use of safety tools in the moment.
Very good. Thank you. Genevieve, I want your point of view on the consent layer, or the incremental consent, as I like to call it. How does that get handled in Magic, in your tool?
Yeah, sure. So like it is fairly similar, to an existing kind of sort of, I guess, application operating model, right? In a shared responsibility situation. So, for example, I was talking initially about like using eye tracking data to track your data, to track your eyes, so we can like render stuff, directly to screen, and we don't store that data. It's just like a bunch of math that happens so that you can see like the coolest thing possible. And your consent for that basically is part of the terms of service, the EULA, of the Magic Leap device, right? But then what about like applications that might want to use, this eye tracking data? So one example could be like a medical application, right? So in a medical application, sometimes they use eye tracking data, to be able to diagnose like, specific things about your eyes. I don't exactly know how it works, but it sounds really cool. But in this case, like both the medical provider, like, whoever doctor or institution is providing you with this application, needs to tell you, what's going on, and also like, is data being taken off the device? Is data being stored? Do you get a copy of it, right? And then the application itself also needs to, and this is actually built into our licensing model as well. In order to access certain types of like sensor data, an application has to give you a separate single, like per instance, per user, sort of dialogue to inform the user and to get their consent to actually use the sensor data. So I think I agree that, there should be like different sort of escalating consent levels, as well as, the reminders over time of like how this data is being used. Another situation where like eye tracking could be used that also might need consents, for example, is like avatars, right? So, avatars can make the use of eye tracking information to make their avatars look a little bit more realistic. And again, the first time they sign up for a given metaverse, we believe that, that metaverse application, whatever it may be, again, should request this information from users, and it's enforced again by a consent policy in order to access this specific sensor API, or sensor data rather. And then there is a dialogue that's shown to the user. We also believe, and one of the things we're working towards in XRSI is like a way to like access that information after the fact, right? So like you agreed to it at one point in time, you put down your device, I don't know, you went through Christmas, you did all family things, and like 3 weeks later, you're putting back this thing on, you've like forgotten what you've consented to, right? So there needs to be a way to go back and understand, or you signed into it, and understand like what you consented to, or you signed into it and then now you want to give it to your kid to play with, right? Again, like we need to find a way to go back and understand like all the things that you previously consented to.
Very good. Anna, I want your thoughts on a bullying scenario. So let's say you're in a room or in a space, and everyone in that room decides, okay, we don't like Anne, so we're gonna like report her to, the administrator or whatever. And so maybe that comes through as, okay, Anne's doing something bad. We have all these reports about Anne, but how do you all parse those types of scenarios? I'm just curious.
I think that you're talking about when people gang up on people, and it's
Yes.
The act of reporting becomes nefarious in and of itself. Yeah, so
Yes.
So one of the ways to address that is looking at signals. So looking at mass reporting incidents, and understanding how that should change the way that we deal with those scenarios. So being able to, in the future, identify, detect that type of action, and then take enforcement actions based on that. There's a feature within Horizon Worlds. It's called Pull to Remove. Those who've played MMORPGs will be similar to these types of features where you can vote to kick someone from, say, a party. These features provide the folks on the ground the ability to take those types of actions, similar like moderation actions effectively of the behavior that's going on around them. And part of that is because meta is not going to and should not be in every space that everyone is and moderating live. The other piece is the piece that Genevieve and I said earlier, which is the end user has a really strong role to play in these spaces in taking safety actions. And so I think if we're thinking through this layered approach, there is the detection piece of these types of harms and understanding how they're evolving. But there's also education for people that are using features like Pull to Remove, that they shouldn't be used or abused in ways that can occur. For example, that guy looks like X, so let's all gang up on him and remove him from this space. Or this person seems too old to be here. Let's remove them from the space. And so there's education at the point of using features like Pull to Remove, that taking these actions based on someone's characteristics is not good. It's not the right use of this tool. Yeah, those are some of the ways that we're thinking through how safety evolves in these spaces, but there's always going to be some really interesting problems that emerge, because one of the features of social and virtual immersive spaces is their open-ended nature. So even in the space that we are in right now, there's a variety of activity that could be occurring in this space. This could be used as a comedy club. This could be used as a place where we're all watching football together. There is no necessary behavior that can occur. And so one of the things that you're thinking through and is very important as we continue to look at our policies and develop our policies is to take into the account the ways that harms are evolving in the now, and the differences between these spaces. So one that I didn't mention is digital identity. So someone made a good, I think, decision to remove all of our usernames. My username is Radagast, which is that is my like old World of Warcraft username, and it's a reference to a male wizard from Lord of the Rings. And so like exploration of one's identity digitally, and the reason that that has been my username forever is because in World of Warcraft, I didn't want to identify as a woman because that would invite unwanted questions. This was like 2006 and 7. And like, so it was just easier to be that identity. And so what does the way that identity will evolve will challenge how we think about things like authenticity or impersonation, because there are entire realities, well, I guess virtual realities. Like one of my favorites is this server on Grand Theft Auto called NoPixel, where they all role play constantly and like comedically. And if impersonation was, not allowed, then that entire server would not exist, and the joy that people get from watching these people stream that experience to Twitch would not exist. So I think that the nuance policy is important, but also considering how harms evolve and how the needs of people in digital spaces evolve to want to be how they want to appear.
Debbie, do we have your audio? Debbie, just jumping in to assist you with the audio. Are you having audio issues?
Yeah. No, I'm not having audio issues.
Okay, great.
Genevieve, I want to know, does the context in which behavior happens change the types of harms that you're thinking of in these spaces? That makes sense? So let's say a behavior in one context is okay, but in a different context, it may be considered harmful. I want your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would. I don't think I could disagree. I think that's it. It sounds kind of more like a statement, but I would agree with that. I can't really think of an example off the top of my head, but certainly like different workplaces have different workplace culture. And some are much more buttoned up. They're considered like absolutely verbatim. Absolutely forbidden rather. So, and I think that really comes down to kind of what we're saying is like any sort of metaverse and any sort of collection of people. I'm not sure that we can heuristically determine, what is considered allowed and not allowed there. And that's why like every metaverse sort of, I guess, application or system, right? Would need a really good like content moderation tool that allows, the people who are setting the policy, for that specific metaverse to set that policy, right? Without a content moderation tool, you can't set that policy. I guess that's a little more theoretical because Magically specifically doesn't really provide like a metaverse per se. We provide a platform to allow users to go into the metaverse, even though we care greatly about how metaverses evolve. Because we have a vested interest in people finding use and joy out of them as opposed to misery. But we do believe that it's very much a shared responsibility of those who are creating that specific, metaverse, and those who are in it, to ensure that it's a good experience for everyone involved.
Oh, thank you. I thought of an example, and I'll throw this over to Anne. So let's say your space is a church, and then so someone is swearing in the church. That's probably not acceptable, but maybe they're playing a game in a different space. That's okay. So, how can people tune those experiences, I guess?
Yeah, I love that question because it's something that we've been thinking about and how to empower users and creators on the ground, the folks that might expect that they have the agency to control the spaces that they have made. So I think I gave the example of personal space, but in the future, there could be spaces similar to the one we're in now, where a creator has created the space for a specific purpose. Events are another example. Technically, this is an event, where we have basically enabled a way to allow folks to create rules and communicate those rules, and for folks to acknowledge those rules or be able to look them up upon entry. So an example of a rule would be respectful or respect the decisions of the person moderating, for example. Another really important point here is governing spaces in real time is very hard to do. And so you need to be able to delegate that responsibility if you are the person who is responsible. And that means being able to assign moderators like you can do for events in Horizon Worlds, and be able to really have more control over the people who can enter and exit your space. So those are some of the things that we're thinking through, but one very key foundational basis of this is, in order to foster governance, you need to be very clear about who is responsible ultimately for that governance. And because it's a shared responsibility, it is somewhat hard to do. And I think requires that education we were getting back to earlier, and that be contextual, and especially at the point of entry into a new scenario or experience.
Very good. Well, we have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to open up the floor to any questions that anyone may have, whether you want to put them in the chat or you want to verbally speak.
Jeffy, while we're waiting for additional questions to come in, maybe we can take a few questions that came in over the streaming via YouTube. Can I just go ahead with the first one, please?
Oh, sure, yes.
Great. The first question is, Meta and Magic Leap represent two separate worlds. The hypergrid is an open simulator effort to allow people to own their avatar, data, digital goods, and travel between grids. Is this part of your roadmap?
Was that a question for me?
It looks like it's just a question for both of you.
I wasn't able to hear it, so I think Genevieve should answer.
Okay, yeah, I can kind of answer that. So I mean, in the past, Magic Leap has been, interested, or was it more of a consumer-facing company, and we did create avatars, and a system for building avatars, and a system also for using avatars in application. So I can't really answer for the intention, what the intentions were back then. But certainly right now, we're much more interested in partnering with avatar company, other avatar providers, whether it's like an open source project, whether it's like a commercial project, whether it's an existing world like Horizons, or any other metaverse, and providing the data to make the best avatars possible, right? And that that data comes from Sender. That data comes from your head movements, and what way you're facing, and tracking kind of like how you're moving and how your head's bobbing up and down to simulate walking, or whatever the case may be as you move around in space. But we're not really and then it would be up to whoever's using that data, consuming that that avatar information creation. But so we're really much more into being a platform and solution provider as opposed to specifically an avatar creation company right now, at least at this moment.
Kavya, did you have a question?
Hey, Anne and Jen, thank you for being part of this effort, first of all. And I'm really glad that both Meta and Magic Leap are contributing to the shared responsibility model that you talked about. And of course, we're going to continue the discussion offline as well, but I wanted to specifically ask about Enterprise XR. So specifically in Enterprise XR, do you have any sort of off the top of your mind guidance that is so distinctively different in the XR ecosystem? So let's say maybe for HR managers who might be training people and utilizing your ecosystems, devices, or applications with respect to anything that comes to mind. It could be privacy data, a whole plethora of things. So what could be so distinctly different that some of the XR, users or the enterprise users may not have thought about yet, or may not have been gearing up to address, and something that we may look forward to addressing together in the shared responsibility model, because it's not entirely up to Meta or Microsoft or Magic Leap. It's collective responsibility. I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm not super close to our business offerings, but the way that I think about it, Kavya, is that there's another layer that's added when you're considering enterprise, and that layer is the company that has a relationship with the employee. And there are expectations and there are contracts that exist in that relationship that mean that it has to be considered differently. So questions about who is the data provider and what is that expectations of the employer of the employee, but also vice versa, are very important. I think that Genevieve probably has more to add here.
No, I mean, I agree with you, and it's actually kind of great. Thanks, Kavya, for introducing us, and like I think we are aligned on a lot of the ways that we're thinking about it. I guess for I think that come with some of the biggest things for HR, in terms of like enterprise policy and safety, or like don't sleep on the metaverse. I think that's the fundamental thing, is that it can be scary. It's just whole new world with like weird cartoon versions of yourself, or people that they can dress up however they like, and so I think it's like don't sleep on it, right? You have to learn. I get what happens in it, like are people for example in a metaverse space, like are people dressing up their avatars in a way that is like not appropriate? Oh, sorry, I'm in a coughing fit right now.
Yeah, do you allow dragons in the virtual boardroom?
All right, well, Genevieve recovers. Anne, we had another question for you from YouTube. Why is Meta basically trying to build all the content instead of just working on infrastructure and tools to let makers do that work as it happens on the rest of the internet?
Got it. Yeah, I think there's efforts for both. I mentioned one of the core areas of focus being economic opportunity, but we're actively and constantly thinking through ways that content creators are going to interact with metaverse experiences. So for example, within Horizon Worlds, there's the ability for folks to not only gain bonus payments based on engagement with their worlds, also to create and sell digital assets. We hope to scale that program in the next year. So stay tuned. I think there's going to be a lot happening in that space because, as mentioned, it's not a space that Meta is going to be the only one developing in or developing for. There's going to be a variety, and is currently a variety, of folks that are contributing to content within Horizon Worlds, but also content that's distributed on the Oculus Store, MetaQuest Store. I will never live that down, the changes that have been happening and being able to remember all the terminology.
Great, thank you so much. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Don't see any hands raised at this moment. So if anybody just wants to ask an open question, we have time for one more.
I can finish my answer if no one has a question. Yeah, so I was talking about. Sorry, I got that thing that's going around. We were talking about what should HR managers be aware of. So there's there's the really basic stuff of the avatar, but it's also how can data be used I guess for and against employees. There's a thing of the head pose was kind of a big topic of discussion even way before eye tracking. It's can you use the information? What are people looking at? Are they staring at their job site? Are they staring at another person in an awkward way? All those kind of things. So there's a lot of information that can be used for good, but also for bad as well. So I think that's really the thing that an enterprise or an institution, not just enterprises, needs to be aware of is what is the information that's available, and what are the pros and cons of having that information, who has it, and how is it stored, and what can it be used for. I mean, you could also sense a malicious HR doing something weird with that information too. So I think everybody needs to be aware of the information that's available. Thank you. Thanks for giving me the extra time.
No, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So we are at time. I want to give a big thank you, and Genevieve and Debbie, for that in-depth exploration of factors that will make the metaverse a viable place for us to live within and do business. Certainly plenty of considerations to carry forward and explore going forward. So don't go far in case folks want to catch up with you a minute or two afterwards. In the interest of time, we will only take a 2-minute.
I'm not sure if you guys can hear me. I want to thank everyone for coming to the session. Thank you very much, Anne and Genevieve, for your outstanding contribution to this area. And it's a great session. I love to listen to it again. Very much so. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Debbie. So everybody, we will just take a 2-minute break, and we'll come right back. Don't go far, but if you need to top off your coffee or grab another sip of water, this is your moment. We will roll into our next fireside chat. So don't go too far again. We'll be back in 2 minutes.